I woke up that morning before the sun had fully risen, the quiet kind of morning where the house feels like it's holding its breath. The rain outside tapped softly against the kitchen window, and the sound carried memories through the empty rooms. I stood at the counter with a mug of coffee warming my hands, staring at the small wooden jewelry box resting on the table. It had been sitting there untouched for years, like a chapter of my life I wasn't ready to reopen. Some objects hold more than metal or stone, they hold entire lifetimes. That little box carried the echoes of my marriage, the laughter of younger days, and the promise my husband made when he slipped that ring on my finger. I had kept it closed since the day he passed away because opening it meant revisiting a love I could no longer reach. But that morning felt different somehow. The quiet in the house felt heavier, as if something was asking to be remembered. I took a slow sip of coffee and kept staring at that box, and in my heart, I already knew why it was calling to me again. The reason sat heavily in my chest, tied to the phone call I had received the night before. My son had called late, long after most people were asleep, and the moment I heard his voice I knew something was wrong. A mother always knows when her child is carrying a burden too big to speak easily. He tried to sound calm, but there was a strain beneath his words that he couldn't hide. He told me his company had laid off half their staff, and his position had disappeared overnight. Savings were disappearing faster than he expected. Bills were stacking up, and the mortgage was starting to feel like a mountain he couldn't climb. What hurt the most was the way he kept apologizing during the conversation. He wasn't asking for help. He was apologizing for worrying me. "We'll figure it out," he kept saying, but the confidence in his voice sounded forced. When the call ended, I sat in the dark living room long after midnight thinking about his words. The silence that followed that conversation felt louder than any storm. All night, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the boy he used to be. I remembered the nights when he would crawl into our bed after a nightmare, clutching his little blanket like it was armor against the dark. Back then his problems were simple things: scraped knees, broken toys, schoolyard arguments. I could fix those things with a hug, a bandage, or a few comforting words. Parenting seemed easier when the solutions were small and immediate. But as children grow into adults, their struggles grow with them, becoming complicated in ways that no parent ever feels fully prepared for. The hardest part of loving someone is watching them face storms you cannot stand in front of. That was what kept me awake that night. My son was a grown man with a family of his own, yet the worry I felt for him hadn't changed since the day he was born. A mother's heart doesn't understand the passage of time. To me, he was still the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street. When the first grey light of morning slipped through the curtains, I got up quietly and walked into the kitchen. That was when I noticed the jewelry box sitting there on the table. I hadn't taken it out intentionally. I must have moved it while cleaning a few days earlier and forgotten to put it away. The sight of it made me pause mid-step, my breath catching in my throat for a moment. For years I had kept it tucked safely in the bedroom drawer, hidden away like a fragile memory. But now it sat in the open, almost like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I placed my coffee mug on the counter and slowly walked toward the table. My fingers brushed against the smooth wood of the box, tracing the tiny scratches time had left on its surface. Each mark felt like a reminder of how many years had passed since the day my husband gave it to me. He had bought it as a surprise anniversary gift, laughing when I opened it and said every queen needed a proper place for her treasures. For a long moment I just sat there staring at the box without opening it. The house was silent except for the rain and the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought about the life my husband and I had built together piece by piece. We weren't wealthy people, but we worked hard and found joy in the little things that filled our home. The jewelry inside that box had never been about luxury. Each piece had been a symbol of love earned through sacrifice. The ring he bought when we were young and barely able to afford groceries, the bracelet he surprised me with after his first promotion, the small pendant he gave me the day our son was born, his hands trembling as he held our newborn child. Those pieces were more than objects. They were milestones in the story of our family. That was why I had stopped wearing them after he died. They felt too heavy with memory to carry every day. Eventually, I lifted the lid and looked inside. The soft morning light caught the gold and made it shimmer quietly against the velvet lining. For a moment, it felt like time had folded in on itself, bringing back the warmth of a life that once filled this house with laughter. My wedding ring rested in its usual place, exactly where I had left it all those years ago. Seeing it again stirred emotions I had carefully tucked away for far too long. I picked it up gently, rolling it between my fingers while remembering the night he placed it on my hand. We had been standing under a sky full of stars behind a small country church, promising to face whatever life brought together. Back then, we didn't know how many challenges waited ahead of us. We only knew that love made every uncertainty feel smaller. Holding that ring now felt like holding a piece of his voice, still whispering promises from the past. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined what my husband would say if he was standing in the kitchen with me that morning. He had always been practical, the kind of man who believed that love was something you showed through actions more than words. I could almost hear him telling me that objects only matter when they serve a purpose. Memories, he used to say, live in the heart, not in gold or silver. That thought settled gently into my mind, bringing a calm clarity I hadn't felt since the night before. My son wasn't asking for help, but I knew he needed it. Pride can make people hide their struggles even from the ones who love them most. But a mother doesn't wait for permission to protect her family. Sometimes love requires making decisions quietly, without expecting recognition or gratitude in return. I looked down at the ring again, then at the other pieces lying beside it. The bracelet, the earrings, the delicate pendant shaped like a tiny heart. Each one represented a chapter of my life, yet all of them together could become something more meaningful if they helped secure my son's future. Jewelry locked inside a box serves only memory, but jewelry sold at the right moment can protect the people you care about. That realization didn't erase the ache in my chest, but it gave that ache a purpose. Love had always required sacrifice, and this felt like another one of those moments. I carefully placed the ring back into the box and closed the lid. My hands rested on top of it for a few seconds while I gathered my thoughts. Sometimes the hardest decisions are also the simplest ones. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming steadily against the roof as if urging me forward. I stood up from the table, slipped the jewelry box into my purse, and walked toward the front door. The house felt strangely peaceful, almost approving of the choice I had made. I paused for a moment before leaving, glancing back at the quiet rooms filled with decades of memories. This house had witnessed every chapter of my life, the early struggles, the laughter of raising a child, the heartbreak of loss. Now it was about to witness something else, a quiet act of love meant to protect the future of the family we had built together. I slipped on my coat, took a steady breath, and opened the door. The cool rain greeted me immediately, but I stepped outside without hesitation. Because sometimes the most valuable thing a person owns isn't the treasure they keep, but the love they choose to give away. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time I pulled out of the driveway, but the sky still hung low and grey over the neighborhood. Water slid slowly down the windshield as I drove, blurring the familiar streets into quiet shapes and reflections. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on my purse, feeling the shape of the jewelry box inside like a small secret only I knew. The town looked the same as it always had, the bakery on the corner, the grocery store with the faded sign, the church where my husband and I used to sit in a third pew every Sunday morning. Yet everything felt different that day, as if the world itself understood that something important was about to change. I drove slowly, giving my thoughts room to breathe. Selling the jewelry wasn't about money alone. It was about letting go of a part of the past so the future could stay strong. I reminded myself of that with every mile. My mind drifted back to the first years after my husband passed away, when life felt uncertain and frightening in ways I had never expected. Losing a partner is like losing the ground beneath your feet. Suddenly the world feels unfamiliar and unsteady. During those early years I had learned how to keep moving forward, even when grief sat quietly in the corner of every room. I worked long hours and stretched every dollar to make sure my son never felt the full weight of what we had lost. Some nights I would fall asleep exhausted at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread around me like puzzle pieces. But every morning I woke up determined to keep building a stable life for him. That determination had carried me through decades of challenges. It was the same determination guiding me now as I drove toward the small jewelry store downtown. The closer I got to the center of town, the busier the streets became. People hurried along the sidewalks with umbrellas and coffee cups, their lives moving forward in quiet routines that looked ordinary from the outside. I wondered how many of them were carrying invisible worries just like mine. Life has a way of hiding struggles behind everyday appearances. A smiling face can be holding 100 silent fears. My son had always tried to be strong for his family, just like his father had been strong for us. That was something I admired about him, but it also meant he sometimes carried burdens alone. As I stopped at a red light near the old cinema building, I imagined him sitting at his kitchen table late at night, staring at unpaid bills and wondering how he would keep everything together. The thought tightened something inside my chest, reminding me why I was doing this. The jewelry store appeared at the end of the block, its windows glowing warmly against the grey morning. It had been part of this town for as long as I could remember, owned by the same family for 3 generations. My husband used to joke that the place knew more about our marriage than anyone else, since nearly every piece of jewelry I owned had come from that little shop. The bell above the door gave a gentle chime as I stepped inside, bringing with it the comforting scent of polished wood and soft lighting. Glass display cases stretched along the walls, filled with sparkling necklaces and rings that looked almost too delicate to touch. For a moment I simply stood there, letting the warmth of the room settle around me. The contrast between the quiet rain outside and the calm glow inside made the shop feel like a safe space for difficult decisions. A man behind the counter looked up from a small tray of watches and smiled politely when he saw me. He looked to be in his 40s with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone used to handling precious things. "Good morning," he said, stepping forward. "Is there something I can help you with today?" His voice carried the calm patience of a person who had spent years talking to customers about moments of love, celebration, and sometimes loss. I hesitated for just a second before reaching into my purse and placing the wooden jewelry box gently on the counter. The sound it made against the glass felt louder than it should have, like a door quietly closing behind me. "Yes," I said softly. "I believe you can." My hands rested lightly on the lid while I gathered the courage to open it. When I lifted the top, the gold inside caught the warm light and reflected it across the glass counter in soft flashes. The man leaned forward slightly, studying the pieces with the trained attention of someone who understood both their beauty and their value. He didn't speak immediately, which I appreciated. Some moments deserve silence before words. Finally, he looked up at me and asked gently, "Are you looking to have these appraised, or are you thinking of selling them?" The question hung in the air between us, simple and direct. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle fully into place. "Selling," I replied quietly. Saying the word out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Yet strangely, instead of regret, I felt a sense of calm spreading through me. He nodded with quiet understanding and began examining each piece carefully, placing them one by one on a small velvet cloth. While he worked, my mind wandered again through the memories tied to each item. The bracelet reminded me of the night my husband danced with me in the kitchen after receiving his first big promotion. The earrings brought back the image of our son laughing in his high chair during his first birthday party. The pendant carried the warmth of countless ordinary days when I wore it close to my heart without thinking twice. Watching those pieces leave the jewelry box felt like watching old photographs drift past in a slow-moving river. Yet I reminded myself that memories do not disappear just because the objects connected to them move on. The love behind those moments remained untouched. After several quiet minutes, the jeweler looked up and gave me a thoughtful smile. "These are beautiful pieces," he said. "They've clearly been well cared for." He explained their approximate value with careful professionalism, writing numbers on a small pad of paper and turning it toward me. The amount was more than I had expected, enough to ease a significant portion of the pressure weighing on my son's shoulders. Seeing those numbers brought a sudden rush of emotion that I hadn't anticipated. Not sadness, but relief. The kind of relief that comes when a solution finally appears after days of worry. I nodded slowly, letting the moment settle before speaking. "That will help my family very much," I said simply. The man studied my face for a moment, as if sensing the deeper story behind my visit. He didn't ask questions, which I respected more than curiosity. Instead, he carefully gathered the jewelry again and prepared the paperwork needed to complete the sale. While he worked, I glanced around the shop at the other displays filled with sparkling treasures. Couples would come here to celebrate engagements, anniversaries, and new beginnings. Today I was here for a different reason, yet in its own way it was also about protecting the future of the people I loved. Sometimes the greatest acts of love happen quietly, without witnesses or applause. They happen in places like this, between strangers who understand that value is measured by more than price tags. When the transaction was finished, he handed me an envelope containing the payment and offered a respectful nod. I thanked him sincerely, slipping the envelope into my purse where the jewelry box had rested earlier. The box itself now felt strangely light in my hands as I carried it back to the car. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped, leaving the streets shining under a break in the clouds. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the quiet settle around me again. The past had not been erased by what I had done. It had simply transformed into something new, something capable of protecting the future of my son and his family, and for the first time since that late-night phone call, I felt certain that everything was going to be all right. I sat in the car for a long moment after leaving the jewelry store, watching the last drops of rain slide down the windshield like quiet tears the sky had finished shedding. The envelope inside my purse felt heavier than the jewelry box had been earlier, though I knew the real weight came from what it represented. I wasn't thinking about the gold I had just sold. I was thinking about the relief it could bring to my son's household. Somewhere across town, he was probably pacing his kitchen floor, trying to calculate how long their savings would last before the next bill arrived. I imagined his wife quietly checking the mailbox every afternoon with a knot in her stomach, hoping nothing urgent appeared. I pictured my grandchildren doing their homework at the dining table, unaware that the adults around them were carrying a storm of worry. Children deserve to feel safe in their homes. They deserve to believe that tomorrow will always arrive with the same stability as today. I started the car and pulled slowly onto the street, letting the tires roll gently over the wet pavement. The clouds above were beginning to break apart, thin strips of pale sunlight pushing through as if the sky itself was opening a window. Driving through town felt different now, lighter somehow, as though a quiet solution had already begun to unfold. The envelope resting beside me carried more than money. It carried the ability to buy time, and sometimes time is the most valuable gift you can give someone who is struggling. Time to breathe, time to rebuild, time to remember that setbacks are not the end of a story. As I passed the park where my son used to play baseball as a child, I slowed the car slightly and smiled at the memory of those long summer evenings. Back then, life seemed simple and full of endless possibilities. I remembered sitting on a wooden bench beside my husband while we watched our son swing the bat with all the determination a 10-year-old could muster. He wasn't the strongest player on the team, but he was always the most persistent. When he missed a ball, he would simply tighten his grip and try again, refusing to let disappointment slow him down. That stubborn resilience had followed him into adulthood, helping him build a career and support his family through hard work. But even the strongest people sometimes encounter obstacles they cannot overcome alone. That was why family existed, to stand beside each other when life became too heavy for one person to carry. My husband used to say that strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about knowing when to lean on the people who love you. I wished he was still here to remind our son of that truth. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the sky had brightened enough to cast soft light across the houses. Water glistened on the lawns and rooftops, making everything look freshly washed and peaceful. I parked the car in the driveway and sat quietly for a moment before stepping out. The air smelled clean and cool after the rain, carrying the faint scent of wet grass and blooming flowers from the gardens nearby. It felt like the kind of afternoon when life pauses briefly to catch its breath. Inside my house, the familiar stillness greeted me as I hung my coat by the door and walked into the kitchen. The empty jewelry box rested on the table where I had left it earlier that morning. Seeing it again stirred a small ache in my chest, but it wasn't regret. It was simply the recognition that one chapter had closed, so another could continue. I opened the envelope carefully and counted the money once more, not because I doubted the amount, but because the reality of it still felt surprising. The sum would cover several months of my son's mortgage payments, and allow him time to search for new work without the constant pressure of losing his home. I placed the money back into the envelope and held it for a moment, imagining the expression on his face when he realized the weight of his worries had suddenly lifted. Knowing my son, he would resist at first. Pride has a way of making good people feel uncomfortable accepting help, especially from their parents. But I also knew that deep down he would understand the gesture came from love, not obligation. Families survive difficult seasons by supporting each other in quiet, meaningful ways. The question now was how to give him the money without making him feel ashamed or indebted. I didn't want him to think I had sacrificed something precious just to solve his problems. In truth, the jewelry had already served its greatest purpose during the years I wore it. Now it was simply taking on a new role, continuing to protect the family my husband and I had created together. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down at the table, letting my thoughts settle. The afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating the empty box like a small stage where the past had taken its final bow. I ran my fingers over the velvet lining and smiled softly. Sometimes letting go of an object allows its meaning to grow stronger rather than fade. After a while, I stood up and walked to the living room, where a framed photograph of my husband rested on the bookshelf. In the picture, he was standing in our backyard, smiling the way he always did when the sun was bright and life felt full of possibility. I picked up the frame and held it gently, speaking quietly as though he was still able to hear me. I told him about the phone call from our son, about the worry that had kept me awake, and about the decision I had made that morning. The words came easily, as if the conversation had been waiting for years to continue. When I finished, I placed the photo back on the shelf and felt a strange sense of comfort settle over me. It was almost like receiving silent approval from the man who had shared my life for so long. Later that afternoon, I decided to call my son and invite him over for dinner. I kept my voice cheerful on the phone, careful not to hint at the surprise waiting for him. He sounded tired, but agreed to come by after picking up the children from school. As soon as we ended the call, I began preparing the meal he loved most when he was growing up: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and the apple pie recipe his father used to request every Sunday evening. Cooking has always been my way of expressing love, a quiet language spoken through the warmth of a kitchen. As the house slowly filled with the familiar aromas of dinner baking in the oven, I felt my earlier anxiety fade away. The simple act of preparing food for my family reminded me that care often reveals itself through the smallest gestures. While the pie cooled on the counter, I placed the envelope carefully inside a plain white card. I wrote a short message on the front in my neatest handwriting. The words were simple and honest, the kind of message that would explain everything without making the moment feel heavy. When I finished, I sealed the card and placed it beside his dinner plate at the table. Outside, the late afternoon sun had finally pushed through the clouds completely, bathing the neighborhood in warm golden light. It felt like the perfect ending to a day that had begun with worry, but was now moving toward hope. I looked around the quiet kitchen and took a slow breath. Soon the front door would open, the children would rush inside with laughter, and my son would sit at the table without knowing that his life was about to change in a quiet but powerful way. The house felt warmer as the evening approached, the kind of warmth that comes from more than just the oven being on. It came from anticipation. I moved slowly around the kitchen, setting the table the way I always had when family came over. Plates in their familiar places, forks and knives neatly aligned, glasses catching the soft light from the window. I placed the white card beside my son's plate and looked at it for a long moment. The envelope inside rested quietly, holding the answer to a problem he had been carrying alone. I wondered how he would react when he saw it. Would he argue with me? Would he feel embarrassed? Knowing him, he would probably try to refuse it at first. But I also knew something else about my son. He had inherited his father's sense of responsibility, and when he realized the help was meant to protect his children, he would understand why I had done it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the quiet of the house. I glanced out the kitchen window just in time to see my son step out of the driver's seat, while the kids climbed excitedly out of the back. Even from a distance, I could see the tiredness in his posture. His shoulders looked heavier than I remembered, like he had been carrying invisible weight for weeks. But the moment the children spotted me through the window, they started waving and laughing, their backpacks bouncing as they ran toward the front door. That simple joy lifted something inside my chest immediately. Children have a way of reminding us what truly matters. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked toward the door just as it opened with a burst of energy. "Grandma!" my granddaughter shouted, rushing forward to wrap her arms around my waist. My grandson followed close behind, already talking about something that had happened at school. Their voices filled the house like music returning after a long silence. My son stepped in last, offering me a tired smile and a quick hug. Up close, I could see the strain around his eyes, the subtle signs of sleepless nights and constant worry. Still, he tried to sound cheerful as he greeted me. "Smells amazing in here, Mom," he said, glancing toward the kitchen. "You didn't have to cook all this." I smiled gently and brushed a bit of rainwater from his jacket. "Of course I did," I replied. "You can't come to my house and expect me not to feed you." The children hurried to the table while my son followed me into the kitchen to help carry the dishes. He moved automatically, setting plates down and filling glasses with water the way he had done countless times growing up. Watching him there stirred a wave of memories that made the moment feel strangely full circle. Years ago, he had stood on a stool beside this same counter, insisting on helping me stir soup or wash vegetables even though he was barely tall enough to reach the sink. Now he was a father himself, doing his best to provide for his own family. Life has a quiet way of repeating itself through generations. As we finished setting the table, he leaned against the counter and let out a slow breath. "It's been a rough week," he admitted softly. I placed the bowl of mashed potatoes on the table and looked at him carefully. "You don't have to carry everything alone," I said gently. He nodded but avoided my eyes, focusing instead on adjusting the napkins beside the plates. "I know," he replied, though his voice carried uncertainty. I want to fix things myself, you know." I understood that feeling completely. Pride can make asking for help feel like failure, even when help is offered with love. Before I could respond, my granddaughter called out from the dining room asking if dinner was ready yet. The moment broke naturally, and my son straightened up with a small smile. "Looks like we're being summoned," he said. We carried the last dishes to the table together, letting the evening move forward. Dinner began with the cheerful chaos that always followed when children were hungry. My grandson talked non-stop about a science project he was working on, while my granddaughter scribed a dance performance she hoped to join at school. Their excitement filled the room, bright and carefree, reminding me exactly why I had made my decision that morning. Watching them laugh and argue over who got the bigger piece of chicken felt like seeing the future itself sitting at my table. My son listened to them with tired affection, occasionally smiling, but still carrying the quiet tension of his worries. I waited patiently, knowing the right moment would come when the conversation slowed and the children focused on their food. Halfway through the meal, my granddaughter suddenly noticed the card beside her father's plate. "Dad, what's that?" she asked curiously. My son looked down, surprised, and picked up the envelope. "Looks like something from Grandma," he said, turning it over in his hands. I kept my expression calm, sipping my water while he opened it carefully. The room grew quieter as he pulled out the envelope inside and glanced at the note I had written. I watched his eyes move slowly across the words, the confusion on his face gradually shifting into realization. He opened the envelope and looked inside, then looked back at me with an expression I will never forget. It was a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and emotion too deep for immediate words. "Mom, what is this?" he asked quietly. The children looked back and forth between us, sensing the seriousness in his voice. I folded my hands on the table and answered calmly. "It's help," I said, "for the mortgage, the bills, whatever you need to get through the next few months." He stared at the envelope again, shaking his head slowly. "You shouldn't have done this," he murmured, though there was no anger in his voice, only surprise and a hint of guilt. I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "Yes, I should have," I replied. "That's what family is for." For a moment he didn't speak at all, just sat there processing the weight of what I had given him. Finally he looked up, his eyes shining slightly with emotion he was trying to hide from the children. "Where did this come from?" he asked. I smiled softly, already knowing the question was coming. "From something your father gave me a long time ago," I answered. His eyebrows lifted with curiosity, but before he could ask anything else, my grandson interrupted by asking for more potatoes. The moment lightened again, the conversation drifting back to ordinary things. Yet the meaning of what had just happened hung quietly in the air between my son and me. He placed the envelope carefully back inside the card and set it beside his plate, still looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. The rest of the meal passed in a gentle rhythm of laughter and small talk. But every now and then I caught my son glancing at the card again, as if reassuring himself that it was real. When dinner finally ended and the children ran off to the living room to watch cartoons, he remained at the table with me for a moment. The silence between us felt full of understanding. He picked up the card again, turning it slowly in his hands. "I don't know how to thank you for this," he said quietly. I simply smiled and stood up to gather the dishes. "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "Just take care of your family. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." My son remained seated at the table for a moment after I stood up to collect the dishes. I could feel his eyes following me as I carried the plates toward the sink, the envelope still resting in his hands. The kitchen felt calm again, the kind of quiet that comes after an important truth has been shared. Water ran softly as I rinsed the plates, giving him time to gather his thoughts. When I turned around, he was still looking at the card as though it carried more than just money. Finally, he stood and walked over to the counter, placing the envelope carefully beside the sink. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice heavier than before, "I can't take this from you." His words were gentle, but the determination in them was clear. I dried my hands on the towel and looked at him steadily, already expecting that response. "You're not taking anything from me," I replied calmly. "I'm giving it to you." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair the way he used to when he was frustrated as a teenager. "But this must be everything you have saved," he insisted. "You've worked too hard your whole life to just hand it over like this." I could hear the worry behind his protest. He wasn't thinking about his own situation anymore. He was worried about me. That was the part of him that always reminded me so much of his father. "Sit down for a minute," I told him gently, gesturing toward the chair by the table. After a short hesitation, he obeyed. I poured us both a cup of tea and sat across from him, letting the warmth of the moment settle around us. "Do you remember the wooden jewelry box that used to sit on my dresser?" I asked softly. He nodded slowly, confusion crossing his face. "Of course I remember it," he said. "Dad gave it to you years ago." I smiled faintly, remembering the day my husband had brought it home, wrapped in newspaper, because we couldn't afford fancy gift paper at the time. "That's right," I said. "Inside that box were the pieces of jewelry your father bought for me over the years." My son's eyes widened slightly as the realization began to form. "Mom, you didn't," he started, his voice trailing off before he finished the sentence. I nodded once calmly. "Yes, I did," I said. "This morning I took those pieces to the jewelry store downtown and sold them." For a moment he simply stared at me in silence, as if trying to understand the weight of what I had done. "Those were Dad's gifts to you," he said quietly. "You love them." I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. "I loved what they represented," I corrected softly. "And what they represented was love, sacrifice, and taking care of our family." His eyes lowered to the table, emotion flickering across his face as he processed the meaning behind my words. "But those memories aren't locked inside gold," I continued. "They live right here." I tapped my chest lightly, then gestured toward him. "And right there too." The room fell silent again, but it was a thoughtful silence rather than an uncomfortable one. My son leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "I wish you hadn't done that," he said after a moment, though his voice carried more sadness than protest now. "Those things were special." I nodded gently, acknowledging the truth in his words. "Yes, they were," I agreed. "But you and your children are more special than any object could ever be." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "Your father always believed that love meant showing up when it mattered most. If he were here today, he would have done the exact same thing." My son looked up at me quickly, his expression softening. The mention of his father always carried a quiet power between us, reminding us both of the man who had shaped our lives so deeply. He picked up the envelope again and turned it slowly in his hands. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "Part of me feels relieved, but another part feels like I've failed somehow." I shook my head firmly. "You haven't failed," I said. "Life throws unexpected storms at everyone. The only real failure would be refusing help from the people who care about you." I watched him carefully, seeing the struggle in his eyes as he tried to balance pride with gratitude. After a moment, he looked toward the living room, where the sound of the children laughing at a cartoon drifted into the kitchen. The sound seemed to remind him of exactly what was at stake. "They deserve stability," he said quietly. "They deserve a home that feels safe." I nodded in agreement. "Exactly," I replied. "And now you have the breathing room to make sure they keep that." His shoulders seemed to relax slightly as he absorbed that truth. For weeks he had been carrying the pressure of trying to fix everything alone. Now, at least for a while, that pressure had eased. "I promise I'll pay you back," he said suddenly, determination returning to his voice. I smiled softly and shook my head. "No," I said gently. "You won't." He frowned in confusion. "Why not?" He frowned in confusion. "Why not?" he asked. "Because this isn't a loan," I explained. "It's a gift from your father and me to the family we built together." I paused, letting the meaning settle in his mind before continuing. "One day, when your children face challenges of their own, you'll understand exactly why we did it." My son looked at me for a long moment, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and quiet emotion. Then he nodded slowly, finally accepting what I was offering. "Thank you," he said simply. The words were small, but the sincerity behind them filled the room. A few minutes later, the children ran into the kitchen asking if they could have dessert. The mood shifted naturally back to warmth and laughter as I brought out the apple pie from earlier. My grandson insisted on helping cut the slices, even though his pieces ended up uneven and slightly crooked. Watching them enjoy their dessert felt like seeing the future I had hoped to protect that morning. My son sat quietly beside them, occasionally glancing at the envelope again as if reminding himself that the burden he had been carrying was finally lighter. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, my son hugged me longer than usual at the front door. "I'll never forget what you did today," he said softly. I patted his shoulder and smiled. "Just focus on moving forward," I replied. "That's all any parent ever wants for their child." He nodded, then walked toward the car where the children were already arguing about which music to play on the drive home. I stood on the porch watching them go, feeling a deep sense of peace settle inside me. The jewelry may have been gone, but the love behind it had only grown stronger. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling gently through the curtains. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee from the night before, and I smiled to myself, knowing the day held nothing but calm and purpose. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and carried it to the small table by the window. The envelope that had caused so much tension the previous day still sat on the counter, unopened by anyone but my son. I glanced at it and allowed myself a quiet moment to reflect. The decision I had made, selling the jewelry, giving him the funds, wasn't easy. Every piece in that wooden box had a story, a memory woven into its gold and gemstones. Yet in my heart, I knew I had made the right choice. Family always mattered more than objects, and now, with the children safe and laughter filling their home, I could finally breathe. I sipped my tea slowly, thinking back over the past months, the endless struggle to maintain the balance between pride and love. It had been a constant challenge wanting to support my son without diminishing his sense of responsibility, helping without overstepping. Yet life had a way of teaching lessons we couldn't ignore. I realized then that love sometimes required sacrifice and courage in equal measure. That morning, the calm in my house mirrored the calm in my heart, a rare and beautiful alignment. Outside, the neighborhood seemed alive with quiet movement, leaves rustling in a gentle breeze, a neighbor walking their dog, a distant child's laughter drifting down the street. It reminded me how much life continued, no matter the trials we faced. I decided to go for a walk to clear my mind further. The air was crisp, carrying the subtle scent of spring flowers beginning to bloom along the sidewalks. As I walked, I considered how much our relationships define the measure of our lives. Material things, while precious, could never replace the human connections that grounded us. I reflected on my own journey, raising my son alone, navigating grief after my husband passed, the financial struggles we endured, and the small victories that often went unnoticed. Every hardship had prepared me for this very moment, the chance to extend a hand without reservation and witness the impact it had on those I loved most. By the time I returned home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I placed the envelope carefully into a drawer, a symbolic gesture of trust and closure. I turned my attention to my garden, tending to the roses and marigolds that had begun to bloom brightly. There was a rhythm to gardening, a comforting repetition that reminded me life continues to grow even after seasons of hardship. Kneeling in the soil, I traced the path of each root, feeling the earth give under my fingers, steady and real. It was in these small, deliberate moments that I found peace. My family's security, the laughter of my grandchildren, and the knowledge that I had acted with love and wisdom filled me with a quiet triumph far deeper than any material possession could offer. As I watered the plants, I noticed a faint sound of footsteps on the porch. I looked up and saw my son standing there, hands in his pockets, a hesitant smile on his face. "Mum," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I wanted to check on you before we head out." I invited him inside, and we settled at the table once more, this time with nothing formal to discuss, only casual conversation. He talked about school events the children had enjoyed, neighborhood news, and the little successes at work. I listened, offering a gentle comment here or a laugh there, simply enjoying the rare, uncomplicated connection that had been difficult to maintain in recent months. We didn't need to speak of the envelope or the past. The act itself had already bridged the unspoken gap. After a while, the children returned to the table, eager to continue their projects from the night before. I watched them interact, their laughter intertwining with the conversation. My son glanced at me occasionally, and I could see a mixture of gratitude, relief, and pride reflected in his eyes. We didn't speak of my sacrifices openly, but the silent acknowledgement passed between us. Moments like this are rare, born from challenges and nurtured by mutual respect. The children, blissfully unaware of the weight their father carried, brought joy that reminded us all why the choices we make matter. Every decision, every act of love, reverberates through time, shaping futures in ways we may never fully comprehend. Later that afternoon, as I sat back in my chair sipping tea, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The small house that once seemed limiting had become a sanctuary, filled with warmth, laughter, and security. Every corner of the home carried a quiet testament to the love and perseverance that had guided our lives. I thought of the wooden jewelry box once full of gold and memories now transformed into tangible support for my son and his family. Objects can be replaced, memories can be remembered, but love active, intentional love remains the most powerful force in any household. That realization settled in my chest like a calm tide, steadying every concern and worry. As the day turned into evening, I prepared a simple dinner, allowing the comforting aroma of fresh baked bread and roasted vegetables to fill the house. My son and the children gathered around, chatting freely and occasionally seeking my advice on small matters. It struck me how effortlessly life could return to its natural rhythm when love and trust are at the center. No amount of money, gifts, or objects could replicate that feeling. The simple act of providing support, offering guidance, and creating a safe environment had more impact than anything else I could have done. Every story, every memory, every meal shared together reinforced the truth that family remains the cornerstone of life. After dinner, I gathered the children for a small storytelling session, recounting tales of their father's childhood, funny mishaps, and the lessons we had learned together over the years. They listened with wide eyes, laughing at the humorous moments and growing thoughtful at the lessons. My son sat back, observing, and I noticed a faint smile tugging at his lips, the kind that comes from seeing continuity, legacy, and love preserved. I realized that in guiding the next generation, we also heal past wounds, bridge gaps, and ensure that the wisdom gained from experience is passed forward. As night fell, I tucked the children into bed, lingering in their rooms a moment longer than necessary, savoring the closeness that comes from shared trust and care. Each hug, each whispered goodnight, carried with it layers of history, effort, and love. I reflected on the fact that life is never measured solely by what we acquire, but by the care we extend to others, the boundaries we honor, and the courage we show in moments of uncertainty. Tonight, as I sat back in the quiet of my home, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The challenges of the past seemed smaller, softened by the knowledge that love had prevailed and that my family remained intact, safe, and strong. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting the walls with a warm glow that seemed almost symbolic of the new beginning we were experiencing. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the aroma curling gently into the air, and poured myself a cup. The house was quiet for the moment, the children still asleep, my son out on a brief errand to pick up groceries. It was in these rare moments of solitude that reflection came naturally. I thought about the past weeks, the anxiety, the uncertainty, the weight of responsibility I had carried alone, and the small yet monumental decisions that had shaped our current peace. Selling my jewelry had been one of the most difficult acts of love I'd ever committed, but it had brought the result I had hoped for: safety, stability, and a renewed connection with my family. I moved to the small table by the window, cradling the warm cup in my hands. Outside, the garden stretched in quiet beauty. The roses I had planted months ago were beginning to bloom fully, their colors vibrant against the backdrop of green. Each blossom seemed to mirror the growth and resilience that had become our family's hallmark. I allowed myself a moment to marvel at the symbolism. Nurturing the fragile yet persistent life of plants reflected the nurturing of relationships, the careful tending required to maintain trust, love, and understanding. These thoughts filled me with gratitude, not just for the children or my son, but for the strength I had found within myself. Strength I had found within myself, strength I hadn't fully recognized until these trials. As the morning wore on, my son returned, bags of groceries in hand. He paused at the door, looking slightly hesitant, as if unsure how to approach the morning after everything that had transpired. I smiled softly, signaling for him to come in and set the bags down. "Morning," I said warmly. "You look tired." He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I am," he admitted. "But the kids are happier today. That's what matters." I nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness. "That's always what matters," I said, leaning against the counter. He began unpacking the groceries, carefully placing each item in its designated spot. There was a quiet rhythm to his movements, a sense of order and purpose that felt reassuring. Watching him, I realized how deeply my actions had allowed him to exhale, to release some of the weight he had been carrying alone. Once the groceries were put away, we sat down at the kitchen table together, sharing a simple breakfast of toast, fruit, and tea. Conversation flowed naturally, without pressure or formality. We spoke about the children's school projects, upcoming events, and small neighborhood happenings. The atmosphere was calm, filled with the kind of easy connection that often eludes families caught in the whirlwind of daily struggles. For a long time, I had worried about maintaining authority while still showing compassion, balancing guidance with freedom. Now, in these moments, I understood that the delicate act of giving without expectation had strengthened our bond more than any lecture or instruction ever could. After breakfast, the children emerged, full of energy and laughter. They ran through the house, recounting small adventures and pressing questions to both their father and me. I watched them, feeling the warmth of family knit tightly together. The laughter, the playful arguments, the shared jokes, all of it was a testament to resilience, a living reminder that happiness could thrive even after uncertainty. My son occasionally glanced my way, catching my eye, and a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement passed between us. We had weathered the storm, and our family was intact. For all the struggles and difficult choices, this was the moment that justified every sacrifice. Later in the day, I turned my attention to the tasks that required patience and careful planning. I sat in my study with old documents, receipts, and records spread across the table. While some might consider these mundane, I found clarity in organizing, in ensuring that everything from finances to personal notes was in order. It was a reminder that responsibility is not just about money or possessions, but about protecting one's life and ensuring the well-being of those you love. In that quiet diligence, I found peace, knowing that the foundation I had laid would provide security and stability for years to come. My children, both present and future, would inherit a life fortified by love and foresight rather than chance or luck. By afternoon, the air outside had warmed, and I decided to step into the garden once more. The sun illuminated each petal and leaf, creating a vivid tapestry of color and life. My hands moved instinctively as I tended to the plants, pruning, watering, and ensuring they had the support needed to grow. In this simple act, I found a profound sense of control and serenity. Life, I realized, is often about these small, deliberate acts, the quiet nurturing of love, trust, and care, much like tending a garden. Each gesture compounds, shaping the environment and influencing those around us. Watching the plants respond, growing stronger and more vibrant under my care, mirrored the subtle but powerful changes occurring within my family. As evening approached, I prepared a light dinner, the aroma of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread filling the house. My son and the children gathered around the table, chatting and laughing as they helped set the plates and pour drinks. It was a simple moment, yet it felt monumental after the chaos we had endured. We shared stories, jokes, and reflections from the day, each one reinforcing the deep bond we had nurtured through patience, honesty, and unwavering love. Even my son, usually reserved in expressing emotion, laughed openly, a sound that filled the home with warmth and reassurance. In that moment, I understood the profound power of choosing connection over pride, action over inaction. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, my son and I sat together with quiet cups of tea. He thanked me again, his words soft but meaningful, acknowledging both the sacrifice and the trust that had enabled him to find peace. "I don't know how I would have managed without this," he admitted, his voice tinged with both relief and humility. I smiled, resting my hand on his arm. "You don't have to carry everything alone," I reminded him gently. "We've built this family together, and that means helping each other, even when it's difficult." The simplicity of the statement carried profound weight, reflecting the life lessons I had hoped to impart. It was not about pride, revenge, or repayment. It was about love, resilience, and ensuring the family legacy continued. As the night settled, I reflected on the transformations that had occurred over the past weeks. The jewelry, once symbols of past memories, had become a catalyst for present stability. The children, safe and thriving, brought joy and purpose to each day. My son, no longer weighed down by guilt or financial stress, could engage fully as a parent, fostering growth and confidence in his children. And I, standing at the center of it all, felt a profound peace, a sense that love, sacrifice, and careful planning could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Life, after all, is a series of choices, and each choice carries ripples that affect generations. Watching those ripples unfold in the laughter and safety of my grandchildren provided a quiet, unshakable satisfaction. That morning, I woke to the soft light filtering through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the wooden floor. The house felt unusually still, a calm that came after weeks of tension and worry. I brewed a pot of tea, letting the familiar aroma fill the kitchen, and carried my cup to the small table near the window. Outside, the garden glimmered with dew, each leaf and petal a testament to resilience and renewal. Sitting there, I reflected on the journey that had led us here, the countless small decisions, the sacrifices, the moments of quiet courage. Each choice had been made with love as the guiding principle, and now, in this rare quiet, I could finally see the fruits of that labor. My heart felt lighter, freer, as I watched the morning unfold. I spent the early hours reviewing old letters, photographs, and mementos that told the story of our family. Each item, carefully preserved over the years, reminded me of the love, hardships, and perseverance that shaped us. I traced the edges of a faded photograph of my son as a child, the one where he clutched my hand on the first day of school. Memory washed over me, a gentle wave of nostalgia and gratitude. I realized that while objects could be sold, given away, or lost, the bonds we form, the care we extend, and the lessons we teach endure far beyond material possessions. That morning, the weight of past worries lifted as I embraced the understanding that love, intention, and presence are the most enduring gifts we can give. By mid-morning, my son and the children had returned from a brief outing. The house came alive with energy and laughter, the air filled with conversation and playful chatter. We gathered at the table for a light snack, and I noticed the ease with which we interacted, now free from tension, free from past resentments. It was remarkable how a single act of trust and support, the decision to sell the jewelry and provide for the family, had restored equilibrium. We shared stories, exchanged smiles, and reveled in the simplicity of being together without distraction or worry. These moments, small yet profound, reinforced the power of intentional actions and the lasting impact they have on relationships. Later, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, seeking both fresh air and reflection. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and the faint scent of blooming flowers carried through the streets. As I walked, I considered the journey my family had endured, the financial struggles, the emotional burdens, the moments of doubt and fear. Yet through it all, We had found a way to protect one another, to foster resilience, and to ensure that love remained at the center. I thought of the children, thriving and secure, and of my son, freed from unnecessary weight. Each step on the familiar sidewalks reminded me of the importance of presence, patience, and the deliberate choice to act with compassion and foresight. Returning home, I found the children engaged in creative play, building imaginary worlds with blocks and toys. Their laughter echoed through the house, a joyful soundtrack that contrasted with the quiet intensity of past months. I joined them briefly, guiding, encouraging, and sharing in their imagination. It struck me that fostering creativity and confidence in children requires both presence and guidance, much like nurturing a garden. By supporting them without controlling, by providing resources without demanding, I had created an environment where they could flourish. The sense of accomplishment that accompanied these moments was subtle but deeply satisfying, a confirmation that our choices had lasting, meaningful consequences. As the afternoon wore on, my son suggested we tackle a small project together, organizing the garage. I agreed, recognizing it as an opportunity to bond while creating practical solutions for our shared space. We moved boxes, sorted tools, and cleaned surfaces, laughing at the chaos and reminiscing about the past. The work was physical, grounding, and oddly therapeutic, providing a rhythm that allowed us to communicate beyond words. In these shared tasks, I observed subtle shifts, confidence restored, trust strengthened, and an unspoken understanding that our family unit had endured and grown stronger. Even mundane activities became moments of connection, weaving the fabric of family tighter with each cooperative effort. By evening, I prepared a simple dinner, the aroma of baked vegetables and simmering stew filling the home. We gathered at the table, and conversation flowed naturally, a comfortable rhythm of shared stories, laughter, and thoughtful interjections. My son's attentiveness to the children, his engagement in their discussions, and the easy laughter that punctuated the meal were evidence of the stability we had worked hard to create. I realized that the act of providing, of ensuring safety and security, extended far beyond material support. It created an environment where trust, confidence, and joy could thrive, a foundation for future generations to grow upon. Every choice, every sacrifice, and every act of patience culminated in moments like this, quiet but profound. After dinner, the children retired to their rooms for bedtime routines, and I found myself sitting in the living room with my son, sharing tea and quiet conversation. We spoke about aspirations, dreams, and reflections on the recent changes in our lives. The dialogue was gentle, respectful, and meaningful, a stark contrast to the tension and anxiety that had characterized our interactions before. It struck me that the power of intentional action, choosing love over pride, patience over haste, could transform even the most strained relationships. Each word shared, each moment of genuine connection reinforced the lesson that family is nurtured not by perfection, but by deliberate care, honesty, and presence. Later, after the household settled into silence, I walked through the garden once more. The roses and marigolds were in full bloom, their colors vibrant under the fading light of dusk. Kneeling among the flowers, I felt the soil under my fingers, grounding me in the reality of growth, renewal, and resilience. The symbolism was profound. Tending life, whether in plants, family, or personal resolve, requires attention, patience, and unwavering commitment. Each blossom represented a choice to nurture, each leaf a testament to perseverance. In this quiet reflection, I recognized the deep satisfaction that comes from fostering life and love, knowing that the efforts of today create the foundation for a flourishing tomorrow. That night, as the house settled into a serene quiet, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, the gentle hum of the evening filling the air. The stars were just beginning to sparkle above, faint pinpricks of light against the deepening sky. Tyler had fallen asleep earlier, and my son had retired to his room, leaving me with a rare moment of reflection and stillness. I let my thoughts drift back over the past weeks, the choices I had made, and the profound impact they had on our family's life. Selling my wedding jewelry, once a symbol of loss, had become an act of empowerment and protection. It had ensured the children's safety, restored my son's focus, and created a space where love could flourish without fear or distraction. As I traced my fingers along the edge of the porch railing, I considered the lessons this period had taught me. Life often presents us with impossible choices, moments where every path demands sacrifice. Yet it is in those moments that the measure of courage and love is revealed, not through grand gestures, but through deliberate, thoughtful action. I understood now that the greatest acts of care often go unnoticed, but their ripple effects extend far beyond the immediate moment. By choosing to act, to prioritize family and protection over sentimentality, I had shaped the trajectory of our lives in ways that would resonate for years to come. The moon rose higher, casting a silver glow across the garden, illuminating the roses and marigolds that had become symbols of resilience and renewal. Each blossom seemed to reflect the growth that had occurred within our family, the strengthening of bonds, the healing of old wounds, and the creation of a home grounded in trust and respect. I marveled at the contrast between the fragility of the petals and the steadfast roots beneath the soil. It was a perfect metaphor for life, delicate yet enduring, beautiful yet resilient, nurtured through attention and care. In that quiet, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that our family had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. I thought about my son and the journey he had undertaken. He had faced immense pressure, grappling with guilt, responsibility, and the weight of uncertainty. Yet through the act of trust and my deliberate intervention, he had found clarity and strength. Watching him grow into a more confident, thoughtful, and attentive parent was profoundly rewarding. The children, too, had begun to flourish, their laughter and curiosity filling the house with energy and joy. The sense of safety and stability that had been restored allowed them to explore, create, and thrive. I realized that the sacrifices I had made were not merely acts of provision, but of empowerment, fostering resilience in the generations that followed. Later, I walked inside and checked on Tyler, ensuring he was tucked comfortably in bed. He looked up at me, eyes bright even in the dim light, and whispered, "Grandma, thank you for everything. I feel safe here." I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and replied softly, "You are always safe, Tyler. Always." His small hand clasped mine, a gentle reminder of why the choices I had made mattered so profoundly. It was not about repayment or acknowledgement. It was about creating a foundation of trust and security, a home where love and guidance were constants. These quiet moments of connection were worth every difficult decision, every ounce of sacrifice. As I returned to the living room, I reflected on the broader implications of our journey. Life, I realized, is rarely linear or predictable. Challenges arise, often demanding strength and resilience we didn't know we possessed. Yet, through deliberate action, reflection, and unwavering commitment to those we love, we can transform adversity into opportunity. The jewelry sold, the risks taken, the careful planning, all of it had culminated in a life that was safer, more connected, and imbued with meaning. The contrast between past uncertainty and present security highlighted the power of intentional choice and the enduring impact of love in action. I spent the remainder of the evening quietly journaling, documenting reflections, small victories, and lessons learned. The act of writing allowed me to process the journey, solidifying insights that would guide future decisions. Each word carried the weight of experience, intention, and hope for the future. By committing these reflections to paper, I ensured that the lessons of sacrifice, resilience, and love would not be forgotten, serving as a guide for the family I had worked so hard to protect. In the quiet glow of lamplight, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a deep understanding that my actions had created lasting positive change. As the night deepened, I allowed myself a final moment of gratitude. I thought of the children's laughter, my son's renewed confidence, and the sense of home and stability that had been restored. I thought of the resilience that had carried us through difficult times and the love that had guided every decision. Selling the jewelry had been difficult, but it had been necessary, and the rewards, peace, safety, and enduring connection were immeasurable. I felt a sense of closure not born of reconciliation or restitution, but of deliberate, empowered action. The choices made had ensured that our family's foundation was secure and that knowledge was a quiet, unshakable comfort. Finally, I rose, stretched, and turned off the lights, feeling the house settle around me in calm contentment. Walking back to the porch, I breathed deeply, inhaling the faint scent of night-blooming flowers and crisp evening air. The journey had been long, challenging, and at times heart-wrenching, yet it had culminated in a profound sense of accomplishment and serenity. I understood that life's trials often demand sacrifice and courage, but they also provide opportunities for growth, renewal, and deep, lasting love. With the moonlight casting soft shadows across the garden, I felt ready for whatever the future might hold, confident in the strength of the family we had nurtured and the love that had guided every choice.